Hi, my name is Devinose. In this short video, we'll be discussing how to communicate the National MPI. Though communication is a very subtle aspect of the entire process of formulating and using the National MPI, it is a crucial aspect because, like every measure, regardless of how good the measure is, without a good communication strategy, that measure cannot be appropriately used. And that is why it's important that we take the time to discuss how to get a good communication strategy for your national MPI. It's important to understand that communication strategies provide some very useful information to guide public action. The national MPI is supposed to be used for policy making to eradicate poverty, and as such, every communication strategy should take cognizance of the importance of the national MPI while recognizing the differences in audiences and users. In this manner, the messages to the different audience have to be shaped to their interests and scope of action. So, for example, in Panama, before the launch of their national MPI, different communication strategies were devised for the different ministries which had policies directly linked the indicators in the MPI. This allowed them to effectively communicate how the MPI was going to be used as a tool to accomplish their policies, as well as reduce overall poverty. And so in this manner, the messages were shaped to the scope of each ministry's action. Even though these messages have to be tailored, they also have to fit into the broader reason for the measure. So, for example, if the MPI is to be used as a budgeting tool, then regardless of how tailored the different communication messages have to be for the different audiences, they all have to feed into the broader message of the purpose of the MPI. And with this, there needs to be some consistency in the communication strategy across all audiences, regardless of how adapted they are to particular interests and backgrounds. Some of the relevant stakeholders, and this is not in any way exhaustive, are policymakers, both incumbent and opposition political parties, bureaucrats, experts of poverty reduction in the country, civil society, journalists, and other people from different media houses, opinion leaders, the international community such as the United Nations organizations, academics, and statistical offices, not just at the national level, but at the subnational level. In communicating to the different audiences, here are just a few examples of how to communicate the same message, but in different ways, depending on the audience. So, for example, if you are communicating to statisticians, academics, or students, the focus may be on methodological rigor and robustness, because this is where their interest lies, in the methodology of the MPI. And so there could be a discussion of how weights are choosing, standard errors, and different robustness and validity tests that have been used to ensure the rigor and credibility of the measure. In communicating to high-level policymakers, the focus may have to be on the intuitive understanding of the measure and how it can directly be linked to policy making. This is because for policymakers, their focus is the electorate and how their policies affect the daily lives of the people they seek to serve. And so understanding how the measure can be used to support their policy making to better the lives of their people might be of paramount importance. For the wider public, it's important to communicate in a very easy to follow and simple manner. So you can use infographics, animations, and videos with a human face to connect the measure to the people in a more humane manner. In devising a communication strategy plan, you would like to think about the communication strategy in three main ways. First, there should be a plan devised for how to communicate the MPI during the design of the measure. Second, there should be a separate plan prepared for the launch of the MPI. And thirdly, there should be a final plan to cover the period after the launch and to keep the momentum of the MPI going in the public discourse and to guide public action even after the launch. For each of these stages, different tools are needed to communicate each of the different processes. And if possible, it could be useful to design some evaluation forms to analyze at each stage how each plan has been successful or not, so that some revisions can be made for the next plan if necessary. So zooming in on the first, prior to the launch, it's important to discuss the process of developing the index and to emphasize the usefulness of the MPI for policy purposes. This can be done, for example, through stakeholder awareness workshops, where different people are called on board to discuss the index, how it is being developed, and how it can be useful for policy making. The overall intended purpose of the MPI also needs to be discussed at this stage. It is important to consider the timeline and respect the chain of command in releasing figures, the official figures of the MPI. With the chain of command, what we mean is that it is important to first discuss the process with the Statistics Office, to discuss the data, and to discuss every other thing pertaining to the data with the Statistics Office. After that, it's important to discuss the findings of the measure with the high-level political officials. This is because these are the ones that are going to formulate policies or link pre-existing policies to the different indicators in the measure. It is therefore important for them to understand the process of thinking through the measure and how the different indicators link to their policies. After this, then it becomes important to talk to the wider audience, to relay the process of developing the index to the wider public, and to grant them that understanding of what the measure means and what it's going to be used for. By the time of the launch, the concept of MPI should not be something new. It should already be making waves in the media, and people should already be familiar with the concept of the MPI. It's also important that the different dimensions and indicators are already approved by an appropriate government body, or what we call a steering committee. And you need to also determine those that are critical of the MPI so that we can reach out and build support from these people. They become very crucial because once they are critical of the MPI, they can become very vocal of the misuse or the unlikeliness of the MPI to be used. And so bridges need to be built with these people who have to be identified. Also, prior to the launch, we need to be very clear about the objectives of the launch. What do we want the launch to accomplish? Who needs to be invited to? And where are we going to hold the launch? For some countries, the launch has been held at the office of the president. In other countries, the vice president's office has been the pivotal office where the launch was held. In some other countries, a neutral setting has been chosen to ensure that the measure is as apolitical as possible. This decision is given to the country to decide where to hold the launch. But prior thought needs to go into who needs to be invited, where it will be taking place, and what the objective of the launch is. Hosts also needs to be designated for the event. Ideally, it should be somebody with a high enough authority in the political sphere, such as a president or a vice president. This is because once we have this high level authority hosting the event, it helps the measure to garner the required urgency and importance that it requires at the national level. There needs to be a mix of both political people and technical people speaking at the launch to also bring on board different stakeholders. You need to be very specific about the key messages for each speaker and make sure that certain crucial points are discussed to avoid any form of confusion. Also, it is very helpful if likely answers are already prepared beforehand for possible questions that may arise for each of the speakers during the launch. In presenting the national MPI, there are certain communication tools and channels that can be used. For example, you could use presentations, press releases, organize certain press conferences, write certain short but informative op-eds, open up a website just for the national MPI, or post stuff about the national MPI on social media such as Twitter and Facebook. Besides these forms of communication channels, you could also write a technical report that incorporates all the technicalities of computing the national MPI, as well as the different findings. and copies of this report can be distributed to all interested parties. We could also visit key media outlets with the political champion of the MPI to participate in very targeted interviews. You could also make very short videos and informative infographics that can be created to visualize the MPI as well as the main findings from the MPI. For the launch of the MPI, you could have a live stream or a podcast that allows many people within the country, but also internationally, to follow the event. However, in all of these channels, using particular experiences of poor people is a very powerful tool for explaining the focus of the MPI, because this allows people to see the MPI not just as a technical statistic, but as a measure that affects the lives of poor people. We hope that with this short video, we have been able to speak a little bit to the communication strategy that is needed in presenting the National MPI. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to write them down, and we'll be happy to respond to all your questions.